This is MATHguide.com, and my name is Mark Karadimos. In this video, you're going to learn how to do a real-world chemistry problem. It's a mixture problem. We're going to address deep thinking, otherwise known as higher-order thinking, and you're going to learn how to use a calculator, namely a TI-Nspire, to do it. Let's get started. So let's take a look at our chemistry mixture problem. How much 10% sulfuric acid must be mixed with how much 30% sulfuric acid to make 200 milliliters of a 15% sulfuric acid? In order to do this problem, we need to organize the information. And to organize this information, we have a helpful table. You could see that we have headers in the table, and then we have these things along the side or the rows of the table. So the columns and rows have been specifically prepared in an important order. So the header of the table has volume, then it has percent, and then it has amount of acid. And on the sides of the table we have the strong solution, that's the more concentrated solution, the weak solution, and then the total mixture. So by arranging the table in this particular manner, it'll make things extremely easy for us to deal with the mathematics. Okay, first let's do the part of filling in the information in the table with what we have here. So in other words, we have a 10% sulfuric acid. So, and then we have a 30% sulfuric acid. So the 10% we would consider to be the weak solution, and the 30% would be the stronger of the two solutions. So before we put our numbers into the table, with percentages that is, we have to change the percent to a decimal value. So the 10%, 10 divided by 100, because that's what percent means, is 0.10. So we're going to put 0.10 in the table. And then the strong solution, 30 divided by 100, is 0.30. All right, so that gets rid of those two pieces of information. Then we have to realize that we're making a 200 milliliter solution. So 200 milliliters, well, that's a volume. And we're going to make that solution, in other words, that's the total mixture after we take the two and pour them together in one, let's say, beaker or flask. Okay, so the 200 is going to go right here. Now we have one more piece of information to throw into the table, and then we're done with the initial word problem. So we have a 15% solution. So 15 divided by 100 is 0.15. Now nowhere in this problem does it say how much strong solution or weak solution we're using. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what we're trying to determine. How much of those do we need so we could produce 200 milliliters, and the 200 milliliters is exactly 15% acid. Okay, well, if we don't know what something is in math, we sometimes use a letter to describe its quantity. So we're going to use X to define the strong solution. And then we're going to use Y to describe the amount of weak solution, or the volume of weak solution. I'm using separate letters because I'm assuming that these two quantities are not the same. They could be the same, but the mathematics will bear that out once we do all the calculations. So I'm assuming that these two values are going to be different, which is a good assumption. Okay, now that we have the volume and the acid, percent acid filled in the table, we need to figure out the amount of acid that's in each one of these solutions. So in order to figure out the amount of acid that's in the solution, you simply multiply across. When you take volume times the percent acid that's in the volume, you will get the amount of acid that's in the solution. So if I take 0.30 times X, I'm going to get 0.30X. If I take Y times 0.10, or the total volume times the ratio that's acid, when I multiply the two, I'm going to get the amount of acid that's in the weak solution. right. So we could multiply across here too. So 200 times the 0.15, and we get 30. All right, so you could see that this table was designed in such a way that you could multiply across the table to come up with the amount of acid. Okay, so the order in which we place these headers in the table is extremely important. So this is the table that you will be using anytime you do one of these chemistry problems. Now, another advantage of using this organizational table is that we have now two equations and they're staring us in the face. Okay, so what's our first one? Well, if you look at the volume, you could see that we're taking X amount of the strong solution, Y amount of the weak solution. We're combining those two together to get 200 milliliters total. So in other words, whatever the amount of X is, if we add it to the amount of Y, we're going to get the total, which is 200. And there's our first equation. So X plus Y equals 200. Okay, now if we look at the acid, we could say that however much acid is in the strong solution and however much acid is in the weak solution, when I combine the amount of acid that's in those solutions, I'm going to get the amount of acid that's going to be in the final solution, or in other words, the mixture. It only makes sense that the acid from the first solution and the acid from the second solution will combine to be the amount of acid in the final mixture. Okay, so there's our second equation right there. So we're going to take the 0.30 X plus the 0.10 Y equals 30. And you can see now we have a system of equations. So at this point in your mathematical career, you have been exposed to systems of equations. There's numerous ways to solve this system. You got Cramer's rule, you got the addition method. Well, you'd have to use the multiplication addition method. There's graphing. All right, however, in this video, I want to show you how to use a piece of technology to actually solve this. And I'm going to show you how to use a graphing calculator. Now, I'm going to show you how to use the TI-Nspire, but you don't have to use the TI-Nspire. There are several calculators that have this capability. As a matter of fact, any graphing well, most, if not all, graphing calculators have this ability built into it. So you could use the Casio, you could use a Hewlett-Packard, you could use the Texas Instruments. There's several online calculators that you could use to do this. All right, but I'm going to now jump to the TI-Nspire. I'm going to show you how to wrangle this system of equations using something called Reduced Row Echelon Form. Okay, so let's go to our next portion of the video. As you can see, I pulled up a Texas Instrument calculator. This is the TI-Nspire. It's one of their latest calculator. So what we're going to do is get a new document. So now what we're going to do is get a calculator, and we're going to punch in some information within a matrix. Okay, let me explain what that means. Right next to the 9 button is this button right here we're going to use. And within this pop-up menu, we have this 3x3 matrix. So let's click on that. So now I want to adjust this matrix. Okay, I'm adjusting it down to 2x3. Let me explain why it is I'm using 2 rows and 3 columns. When I use 2 rows and 3 columns, you can see here's one row, here's another row, here's the 3 columns going up and down. So this now fits the format of the 2 equations that I was given. Okay, what does that mean? The first equation was x plus y equals 200. So I'm going to put 1x plus 1y equals 200. So I've just stripped off the x's and the y's, and I'm using the coefficients. So that's something else you're going to do with this matrix. Okay, so in the next row, I'm putting 0.30x plus 0.10y equals 30. But you'll notice again, I have not included the x's or the y's. So I have this matrix that has nothing but numbers, and I'm going to now enter this into the calculator just by pressing enter. Okay, now this matrix is now stored into the calculator. All right, now that the matrix is stored into the calculator, we're going to use the built-in functionality of the calculator. If you go to Menu, and since we're now working with the matrix, we're going to click on this matrix section, which will then opens up a bunch of functionality within the matrix subsection of the calculator. All right, so within the matrix section, you go now to Reduced Row Echelon Form. When you click on that, you'll see that the calculator throws up the RREF, Reduced Row Echelon Form. Now what I want to do is get this matrix inside the parentheses. So what I did is I clicked the up arrow, it highlights the matrix, and then now you press enter, it brings it back down inside the parentheses. Okay, so once you now have this in there, you can press enter, and the calculator comes up with an answer. Now let's understand what the calculator is telling us. The calculator is giving us an answer that's in the same form in which we plugged in the matrix. So in other words, our first column were x's, second column were y's, and the last column were just numbers. So the same thing's happening here. I'm getting x's in the first column, y's in the second, and then a number. So this first row represents an equation. This is 1x plus no y's equals 50. So in other words, this means x, because there's no y's, x equals 50. 0x's plus 1y is 150. So in other words, this is 1y, just a y, right? There's no x's. Y is equal to 150. Okay, so there you go. I've got x equals 50, y equals 150. Let's go back to our table. All right, so the calculator just gave us some answers, and these are the two values it gave us. So it told us that x is 50 and y is 150. Now remember, these stand for volumes, so our volumes are in milliliters. So of course we know that these are in milliliters. And if our problem is given to us as a sentence, then we respond with a sentence, because we're educated people, or at least we want to learn to be educated people. So we now say, as a sentence, we say that we need 50 milliliters of the 30% solution to be mixed with 150 milliliters of the 10% solution, which will create 200 milliliters of a 15% mixture. And that's your final answer. Okay, now that you've watched this chemistry video, we're going to continue the activity. If you go into the description of this video, in other words, you look down into the description of this video, you're going to see a link which is going to lead to a PDF file. The PDF file has several problems in which you're now going to do. All right, so make sure you go back to MATHguide.com, check out our hundreds of interactive quizzes, our lessons, and of course our instructional videos. Take care.